Nothing went wrong. There was no warning, no email, no explanation, just a denial. She had applied like anyone else, filled out the forms, submitted the document, waited for a response. She wasn't asking for anything unusual, just what millions of people request every year. A line of credit, an apartment, a chance. It was the first time. No criminal record, no missed payment, no unusual behavior. Her income was stable. Her references were solid. She had done everything by the book, followed every instruction, provided every piece of information they asked for. The application was denied, not delayed. Denied. She stared at the screen, refreshing the page, thinking there must be some mistake. She looked for a phone number. Someone who could explain. The website offered a customer service line. She called, waited through the automated menu, pressed 0 repeatedly until a voice finally answered. They tried to understand why, but there was no one to talk to. Not really. The representative was polite, professional. They pulled up her file, scrolled through screens she couldn't see, and repeated what she already knew. The application had been denied. When she asked why, there was a pause. The kind of pause that means the person on the other end is reading something they've been trained to say. I don't have access to the specific criteria used in your case. She asked to speak to a manager. The manager said the same thing. She asked for documentation. They sent her a letter, 2 paragraphs, no specifics, no pathway forward, just the same word, denied. Customer support couldn't explain it because they didn't make the decision. She started searching online, found forums full of people with the same story. Same company, same denial, same silence. Some had been denied loans. Others had been rejected for rentals, flagged by tenant screening services they'd never heard of. One person had been turned down for a job after passing every interview. The final stage, they were told, involved a background check. Nothing came up. But the offer was rescinded anyway. All of them had one thing in common. They had no idea why. The decision wasn't made by a person. It came from a system designed to reduce risk, to move faster, to process thousands of applications in the time it would take a human to read one, to decide quietly, to decide correctly, according to its own logic, to decide without emotion, without bias, without mercy, but also without explanation. These systems exist in nearly every major decision-making process in the United States. They evaluate credit. They screen tenants. They filter job applications. They determine insurance premiums. They assess risk for bail. They calculate eligibility for benefits. They decide who gets seen first in an emergency room. They flag transactions as fraudulent. They route calls to collections. They predict who will default, who will succeed, who will fail. Each system operates on data, thousands of variables, patterns invisible to the human eye, correlations that make sense mathematically, but not intuitively. Zip codes, purchase histories, employment gaps, social connections, online behavior, things you did 5 years ago, things you didn't even know were being recorded. The system doesn't just look at what you've done. It compares you to others. People who looked like you on paper and failed. People who succeeded. The system learns from them. It finds patterns and then it applies those patterns to you. You never see the calculation. You only see the result. She tried to find out what data was being used. She requested her file under federal law. Weeks later, a document arrived. Pages of codes, transaction dates, account numbers, but no explanation of how they connected. No formula, no weights, no way to know which piece of information had tipped the scale. She found one entry that seemed wrong, an address she'd never lived at. She called to correct it. They updated the file. She applied again, denied again. The error? It turned out, hadn't mattered. In the US, automated systems can decide who gets credit, who gets housing, who gets a job interview, who gets flagged. They decide who pays more for insurance based on where they live, who gets approved for a loan based on who their friends are, who gets rejected from an apartment based on an eviction case that was dismissed, who gets filtered out of a hiring process based on a gap in their resume that matches a pattern the system has learned to avoid. Each decision alone seems small. A single application, a single rejection. But these decisions accumulate. You get denied for a credit card. So you use a debit card, but that means you build no credit history, which makes it harder to get approved for an apartment. So you rent from a landlord who doesn't check credit, but that landlord doesn't report payments. So your credit stays flat, which means when you apply for a car loan, you're considered high risk, so you pay higher interest, which makes it harder to save, which makes you more vulnerable the next time something breaks. One denial leads to another, and another, until you're living in a different reality than someone who got approved the first time. Not because you did anything wrong, but because the system decided you are adjacent to risk. The system doesn't see you. It sees a category, a cluster, a probability. And once you're in the wrong cluster, everything you do gets interpreted through that lens. You pay off a debt. The system notes that you once had debt. You changed jobs. The system notes instability. You move to a better neighborhood. The system notes that you're new there, unfamiliar, uncertain. There is no way to signal intent, no way to explain context, no way to say, I know how this looks, but here's what actually happened. Because the system isn't listening. She wasn't alone. Millions of people interact with these systems every year. Most of them never know. The system approves them. They move on. They assume it was their qualifications, their hard work, their good decisions. And maybe it was, but maybe it was also their zip code, their name, their college, the fact that they fit a pattern the system recognized as safe. The ones who get denied don't get that comfort. They're left to wonder. They retrace their steps. They question themselves. They assume they did something wrong, because that's what denial feels like. Personal. But it's not personal. It's statistical. The system doesn't care about your story. It cares about whether your story matches patterns it's been trained to recognize. And if you fall outside those patterns, even slightly, you become an anomaly. And anomalies are risks. So the system says no. The problem isn't that the system makes mistakes. Mistakes can be corrected. The problem is that the system doesn't recognize its decisions as decisions. It sees them as outputs, results, conclusions drawn from data, and data in the system's logic doesn't lie, but data is historical. It reflects the past, and the past is full of bias, full of inequalities, full of patterns that formed because of policies, practices, discrimination, segregation, red hiring practices, lending practices, policing practices. The system learns from that past. It finds patterns in it, and then it reproduces those patterns. Not because it's programmed to discriminate, but because it's programmed to predict. And prediction, when trained on biased data, becomes biased. The system doesn't need to explain itself because it wasn't built to be questioned. It was built to scale, to be efficient, to remove the bottleneck of human decision, to protect companies from risk, to automate what used to take days or weeks, to make decisions that no single person would want to be responsible for. And it works. It processes millions of applications. It reduces defaults. It increases profits. It makes the system faster, cheaper, more consistent. But consistency isn't fairness, and efficiency isn't justice. The system operates in silence. No hearings, no juries, just code running on servers, evaluating inputs, producing outputs. Most people never know it's happening. They apply, they get approved or denied. They move on. But some people get stuck. They get denied once, then again, and they start to realize that something is wrong, not with them, but with the process. They try to fight it. They file complaints. They request reviews. They hire lawyers. But there's nothing to fight. No person who made the decision. No document that explains the reasoning. Just a system that says no. And once you're flagged, you may never know why. She tried everything. She paid off old debts. She avoided applying for new credit. She stayed at the same address. She kept the same job. She did everything financial advisors recommend, everything the websites suggest. Nothing changed. She would apply, wait, get denied. The cycle repeated. Each time, the denial was phrased slightly differently. Unable to verify information, does not meet current criteria. Application incomplete. But the result was always the same. She started to feel invisible, like she was calling out into a void and no one was listening, because no one was. The system didn't have ears. It had thresholds, and she was on the wrong side of them. Got approved. They offered advice. Just try a different company. Make sure your credit report is clean. Maybe wait a few months. She did all of that. It didn't matter because the system had decided something about her, something she couldn't see, couldn't change, couldn't argue against. In courtrooms across the country, judges use risk assessment tools to decide bail. The tools calculate a score, high risk, low risk. The score determines whether someone goes home or stays in jail while waiting for trial. The tools are presented as objective, data-driven, scientific. But when researchers examined them, they found something troubling. The scores were often wrong. People labeled high risk didn't reoffend. People labeled low risk did. But more than that, the scores were biased. They labeled black defendants as high risk at twice the rate of white defendants, even when their criminal histories were identical. The company that made the tool said the algorithm didn't use race, and it didn't. Not directly, but it used proxies, zip codes, employment, family history, things that correlate with race because of systemic inequality. The algorithm learned the patterns, and then it applied them. It didn't see people, it saw categories. It saw categories, risk levels, probabilities, and those probabilities determine freedom. The same logic applies to hiring. Companies use automated systems to screen resumes. The system scanned for keywords: education, experience, employment gaps. They filter out candidates before a human ever sees them. One system, used by major corporations, was found to automatically reject applicants with gaps in their employment history. The system didn't see context. It saw a gap, and gaps were risk. Thousands of qualified candidates were rejected, not by a hiring manager, by a filter. Insurance companies use similar tools. They calculate premiums based on risk. But risk isn't just about driving history. It's about credit scores, occupation, education, where you live, who you live with. People in certain zip codes pay more, not because they've had more accidents, but because people in those zip codes statistically file more claims. The system punishes individuals for the behavior of their neighbors. It's legal, it's widespread, and it's invisible. These aren't isolated cases. They're the structure, the way decisions are made now. Quietly, automatically, at scale, and the scale is what makes it dangerous. When a single person makes a bad decision, it affects one case. When a system makes a bad decision, it affects thousands, millions. And because the system is automatic, those decisions happen faster than anyone can track. By the time someone realizes there's a problem, the damage is done. People have been denied, rejected, filtered out. And there's no way to undo it. No way to go back and say, wait, let's reconsider. The system had decided something about her based on information she couldn't see, using logic she couldn't challenge, with consequences she couldn't escape, and she was one of millions. This wasn't a mistake. It worked exactly as designed. The system was built to protect institutions, to minimize loss, to make decisions quickly and consistently. And by those measures, it succeeded. But it succeeded at a cost. The cost of transparency, of accountability, of the ability to be heard. Systems now decide first. Explanations come later. If ever, and when there is no explanation, there is no appeal, no argument, no second chance, just a decision. Final, irreversible. Quiet. The power isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't need to. It operates in the background, in databases, in servers, in code that runs 1,000 times a day without anyone watching. It shapes lives, determines futures, draws lines between who gets access and who doesn't. And most people never see it happening. They just see the result. Approved, denied. And they assume it's fair, because systems are supposed to be fair, objective, impartial. But a system is only as fair as the data it learns from, and the data reflects the world. A world with inequality, with history, with bias. The system doesn't create that bias, but it amplifies it, automates it, makes it faster, more efficient, harder to see. And once it's embedded in the system, it becomes invisible, normal, just the way things work. No appeal, just a decision